World Insight coming to you live from Beijing on CCTV News. I'm your host, Tian Wei. On today's program, China's first charity law. As the two sessions continue, more details are unveiled about a new law that will both boost and regulate charity in the country. And a blow for Chinese telecom giant ZTE. The U.S. has accused the company of illicit business with Iran, imposing new export restrictions that could cripple its global business, some say. Is the punishment fair? A draft of China's first charity law is being deliberated for the second time since the year 2015. The law will encourage involvement in charity in this country and aims to establish a more standard and transparent environment around donations in China. The public waits to hear whether the law will be really further amended during this year's two sessions.
The country's first charity law. The bill was submitted Wednesday afternoon for the third reading to the National People's Congress at its ongoing annual session, following two readings at the bi-monthly sessions of the NPC Standing Committee. Although charity is still a developing field in China, the country does have a tradition of helping the poor and needy. Donations from social entities and individuals reached 100 billion yuan in 2014, a big rise from the 10 billion yuan seen in 2004. But the reputation of Chinese charities took a hit in 2011, when a woman used social media to claim she managed an organization under the Red Cross Society of China while flaunting her wealth and extravagant lifestyle. The incident and ensuing scandals triggered public concern about embezzlement and improper management of charities. The scandal also dealt a major blow to the name of the state-owned RCSC and caused a massive drop in donations. Lawmakers say that transparency is key when it comes to charity.
Information transparency is the most important. The charity donors, no matter how much he or she donates, should have the rights to know where the money goes to and how it's spent.
Chinese people are becoming more affluent and are increasingly willing to give. A charity law is needed to guarantee donors' rights, help the underprivileged, and punish fraud. Speaking to reporters at a press conference a day ahead of the fourth session of the 12th National People's Congress, NPC spokeswoman Fu Ying said that the importance of the charity law cannot be underestimated.
In terms of supervision, there's still room for improvement. Sometimes people are not so confident of the results of their charity donation, so we need this law.
The draft aims to boost the vitality of charity organizations and raise awareness of social causes, regulate charity behaviors, and promote the healthy development of philanthropy. More discussions will be conducted before the draft is passed into law.
For more discussion about China's charity law, the first one ever, I'm joined here in the Beijing studio, Professor Fu Jun from Peking University with us. Welcome, Professor. And also Ms. Ran Hao, who is a research fellow from the Institute of Law at the Chinese Academy of Social Sciences. Welcome, Ms. Ran. And joining us from Washington, D.C., Professor Christopher Chambers from Georgetown University. Professor Chambers, welcome to you. First of all, Ms. Ran, I understand you've been studying China's charity law and the overall process of drafting it. How is this, the new one, different from the first reading delivered to the National People's Congress last year?
It pushes more for the donors' rights. It allowed donors to take a look of all their donated properties, how it's used in the charity organizations, how charity organizations make it public, such things like this. So the donors will have more rights and will have more trust to those organizations.
The donors you're talking about, Ms. Ran, I know you have some very careful studies already beginning from last year about this possible charity law. You're referring to, are they Chinese or they can also be international citizens? They can be from anywhere?
They could be, I think.
All right, because this is very important for our audience. Our audience from all over the world are watching China's first charity law. Many NGOs are also watching to see how their fate would be coming from all over the world. Professor Fu, what do you make of it? You are a governance expert.
Well, if you are looking at the private donors, the matter is relatively easier. But if you are engaged in public fundraising, it's more complicated. After all, you are receiving funds on behalf of the public. But who is there to play the role of a trustee, and also who is there to carry out the fiduciary duties?
Right.
Now, this is a difficult part.
Let's go to Ms. Ran to answer some of those questions. She is the legal expert sitting here with us. Ms. Ran, so what about that? Fundraising at this moment, I understand, especially international organizations, is not allowed in China. However, donation, when through certain channels, can be done. So what about this second reading of the charity law in China? To what scale and what extent can they change the situation?
Well, it says that this actually, compared to the first reading, it's a little bit of withdrawn. Because
Withdraw in terms of what?
Listen to me. It says that the charity organization or the charity trustee, it means only to public trustee. So, to those persons who want to make
Individuals, rather.
they want to make the charity trust, they may be wait for some time, or actually they could be a kind of change for today, because today the today the NPC is actually
Discussing this.
Discussing and vote
Right, this
for
is
it. So
the reading of it.
it
This
says
is not the
that-
final product because it really needs the approval of the National People's Congress, isn't it?
So it says that there will be some change to it. Let's just wait.
Right.
My-
Professor Fu, go ahead, you want to say something?
My understanding of that, sort of if you look at the area of what's the term? It's a charity
Philanthropic organizations.
organization. That area, you're not just looking at the charity law. If you also look at the civil law, so one argument is that if we are dealing with private donations and the private donations, we will have contracts. If there is a breach of a contract and there is a dispute,
That's
and the
right.
dispute should be resolved in civil laws.
And you
So-
know what, ladies and gentlemen, what we have just debated and discussed is only one minor detail of what this charity law is going to handle. In fact, it has a lot of other details.
Right.
But let me ask you, Professor Chambers, coming from the U.S. Georgetown University, from your perspective, what are you looking at when you see China working on its first charity law? What would really interest you, and what would that mean for some of the American charity organizations and others coming from all over the world?
There are basically two levels that are of interest in the United States. The first is the more general global level that causes very much excitement, because if you look at the development of the United States as an economic world power, one indication of that was the ability of regular citizens, of private donors or small companies, to engage in philanthropy and to give and to help their communities beyond what people might have done for religious practices, because the United States had churches and things like that, and the very wealthy. So once we moved beyond that, so that everybody could do that, and have that transparency through our Internal Revenue Service by registering with the Internal Revenue Service and the advantages of our tax laws, where ordinary citizens could do that. That was an indication that we were a world power. For China, it's very exciting, because this charity law is an affirmation of the maturity and strength of the Chinese economy, that this is something important. Now, on the smaller or the more specific level, yes, there are charities in the United States. There are groups that want to help from everything from education to medical things like that, and the arts, that are looking upon this, and NGOs as well that are based in the United States that are very interested in this and are looking forward to the registration process, because it will make it easier for them.
Yes,
It'll
indeed,
make it easier
Professor.
for them
You
to
mentioned
partner with Chinese sources.
Yeah, you mentioned several important parts, but before we go back to talk specifically about those parts, let's play a quote I got last time from the earlier Davos Forum in Switzerland. Charity, in fact, in the West is much more developed when it comes to legal framework than in China. Earlier at the Davos meeting, I talked to Bill Gates, who of course is the co-founder and of of Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation. The former tech giant is doing equally well now in philanthropy. He shared his views on the development of charity in China. Let's take a look. Wonderful suggestions of establishing Institute of Philanthropy and Research and also talent raising. Anything that you want to share more inspiration with us about that?
Well, it's, you get people who are very successful. They have to decide what their values are. Do they want to give a significant of that money back to help their country or to help the world? And whether that's funding research or helping out people with special needs. There's so many wonderful causes, and that habit, now that China has such a successful economy, I think will develop. I think it'll be fantastic. I think it'll have some similarities to U.S. philanthropy, but it'll have its own nature as well. And I'm always glad when I'm in China to talk to people who are thinking about that, and I see a lot of interest and a lot of progress.
That's Bill Gates. I talked to him earlier at the Davos Economic Forum in Switzerland. He is, of course, very familiar with the Chinese situation. He came here several times every year, talked to the philanthropic community here. But one thing is very important. There are two things when we talk about philanthropy, whether a new law is the best choice. It has to be functional, first of all. Secondly, whether it is going to encourage the spirit of giving, encourage the spirits of philanthropy. So two functions. Let's talk about the first one, function. Earlier we mentioned just some minor details already created a lot of debate in the studio. Let's talk about transparency. Will this law give much better chance of transparency of charities in China? Whether for those who are donating, or those who receive the donation, or those who are soliciting the donation. This is going to be very important.
Right.
How is the system going to be like, Ms. Ra, with this new law?
Because it has a very certain chapter called the public of the information. It asks every charity organization make publication of their annual report, of their including the account, of some other informations. If they violate this publication, this rule, they will be fined very strongly. So
but the thing is, who is going to monitor that? Because if you ask an organization just to publish information about themselves, well, they can just do anything and play with a number. The thing is, who is going to be there to monitor and make sure everything is as it is?
The Civil Affairs Department will be the main part in charge of
the Ministry of Civil Affairs?
Yes.
Is that the department that's likely to monitor every number that this the charity organization going to put out in their annual report?
Well, the charity organization have the obligation to make all the things public. But if they didn't do that, and if they were found, they will be fined very seriously. And well, actually, originally we had a kind of lawmaking that they said that every public interest group can delegate those who were harmed to make the suit to the court. But it's a pity that this one is cancelled from our draft.
Transparency, very important.
Tianwei, you mentioned, and also Bill Gates mentioned the word encourage, to encourage private citizens to give.
Let's talk about the function first, Professor, before we go to the encouragement. So the function is the first
legally,
priority of a law.
Legally, I read the words, there is another function that encourages private citizens to give. Now, if you look at the registration, approval registration system, the previous framework that guiding Chinese philanthropy work is primarily driven by administrative fiat. It's not a legal framework. Right. So that is very ad hoc. You want to incorporate an organization for non-profit services. You have to wait for the government to approve. But
that is the registration problem. That's a registration charity challenge I'm talking about right now, the transparency. So when it comes to transparency, Professor, you are a professor of governance. I have to ask you this. A lot of different ministries and organizations involved in the second reading, the draft of the second reading. As far as I know, the Ministry of Public Security, in charge of security situation in China, the Ministry of Civil Affairs, just as Professor Ran mentioned, and also the administration, state administration of taxation in charge of certification and administration, registration of non-governmental organizations are also involved. These are only a few of the ministries or ministry level organizations likely to be involved in the second reading, but the whole picture is much more complicated than that, and that's why I'm asking about transparency. When you have,
may I?
Yeah, sure. Let me ask this question to Professor Fu before I go to you.
I was going to say, I mean,
let me ask this question, to Professor Fu. So when you have so many organizations, government departments involved, it's one thing to share this important responsibility, but it's also another thing to make sure everybody work on their turf so that the whole project can really serve the purpose. Professor Fu, a professor of governance, your views here.
Now, if you look at this piece of law, you see what I would call 5 building blocks. The first one is the building block for registration. This is the jurisdiction that belongs to Civil Affairs Department, from the township level all the way up to the central level. The second is the fundraising.
Right.
Potentially that will involve criminal acts. So public security, how to do fundraising. And the third one is at the operation level, who is there to supervise, right? And well, many people want to donate, and don't forget, they also want to have a tax reduction.
So the thing is coordination. Professor Chambers, how does that work in your system?
Well, what I was going to say is that you have the good and bad in America. You have the good in that you have a centralized agency, which would be our Internal Revenue Service, and then to some extent smaller tax agencies in the states, in the individual states. The IRS keeps a very good tab on this in terms of functionality. The problem is that if you look at the United States tax code, I mean, just the section pertaining to charitable donations, not-for-profits, fundraising, could take up a few, giant CDs. I mean, there are whole walls of these volumes. So that's the problem. And
you have a price to pay for transparency.
Yes, you do. I mean, and I think that's a thesis that China needs to really explore. There is a price to pay for transparency. It's a good price, but it's still a price, and people have to be vigilant and understand that in terms of the functionality going into it. Now, I mean, I don't think things will get as complex as people might fear in terms of the functionality, but it's still something that China must be watchful for, because you don't want to get into a situation
Ms. Ran,
as you have in the United States.
Right. I have to ask Ms. Ran another question.
Like a spider web.
What about tax deduction? That is a crucial issue because charitable organizations, they cannot at this moment registered as charitable organizations a lot of times, and they don't get tax deduction. And that's why people do not feel encouraged. Even despite of that, a lot of people still contribute. Charitable organizations still work their way for the best. How much of that is going to change with this new law?
It is actually already changed. You know that before this law, the charity organizations could only have tax deduction for just 1 year. But with this year, if they could do it, they could do it for the later 3 years. It says that it could be carried forward for the later 3 years. Although this is actually a breakthrough to the current law, we may need long way to go to make this settled. But it is already a breakthrough. We must admit it. We of course we all need what we call a good law, but we have it's a long way for the historical.
It's a gradual process.
Yes, yeah.
China is talking about.
So I think we should be patient, and we should take a look of the better ones. Yeah, we have the breakthrough. That is better
when
ones.
you talk about patience, it's nice, but China's economy is growing with such a speed that everything else must have to keep up with it. When you do not want to be patient with the economy, you probably really do not want to be that patient with everything else in terms of the efforts being made. Let me get back to you, Professor Chambers. The registration system, of course, is also another issue of interest. At this moment, the international ones is not necessarily going to be registered as non-profit in China, the charity organizations. Of course, we do not know. What about after this new law? It is still being read at this moment. But what do you make of a pace that Ms. Ran just mentioned, that things have to happen gradually?
Well, yes, things have to happen gradually, but you still have to make that first bold move, and this law going to second reading is that bold move that will everything will congeal around it. And I think that in the United States and in Europe, I mean, you know, you have organizations like Bill Gates's, and even, you know, smaller organizations that might want to help in, you know, with education or the arts, or help in rural areas for the environment, et cetera, that are looking at this and are very excited that at least it has gone to this stage, because once you go to this registration stage and international organizations, NGOs,
right,
or American-based charities can partner in China and be registered, and the Chinese people can see these organizations partnered with others pursuant to this law, however the law shakes out.
Right.
This is a very amazing thing for them, and so you know, you have to be patient to see how things develop. But I think moving forward on this quickly will be great for the citizens of China. It'll be great for organizations in the United States.
Professor Fu, before we go, final question for you. China is not lacking the spirit of giving. Throughout our history, every family has their own stories of giving in the previous generation. Now what we're talking about is not about not giving, it's rather about having a legal framework to guarantee the rights of giving. The thing is, whether it's going to meet the demands of this rich spirit in China to give, and to meet the demand of an ever-evolving society, disparities exist, and the people in need to be helped.
Well, generally, it's correct to say we have a lot of people who want to give, but my observation is Chinese continue to operate with their mindset of a village. So they tend to give to people who are friends, people that they know. If they are in distress, they want to give. But in the modern economy, you need to give to people who you do not know. And there are gaps in the holes through which people may engage in frauds. And that is why we need to have a legal framework. The other important reason is that Chinese economy, or for this matter, the charity area, tend to be governed by administrative affairs, as I mentioned. And there is not a good balance between private rights and the public rights. And to have a law moving in the direction of a rule of law system, we have a better balance between private rights and the public rights.
Right.
In other words, what I'm saying is, well, government concerned government department has its own jurisdictions, but their power will also be limited. For instance, registration, right? For instance, after your charity organizations in operation for 2 years, they are entitled to have the rights also to engage in public donation, to raise public donations.
Fundraising you're talking about, but whether that is going to be the case or not, whether that will be in a way already come to the final stage for the second reading of this charity law is still a question. But we hope things will get better when it comes to legal framework. We hope people's spirit of giving will be further encouraged and guaranteed. For now, thank you so much, Ran Hao,
Thank you.
Fu Jun, and Christopher Chambers. Really appreciate it. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Stay with us here on World Insight. We got our final segment coming right up. A blow for Chinese telecom giant ZTE. The U.S. has accused the company of illicit business with Iran, imposing new export restrictions that could cripple its global business. Is the punishment fair? Welcome back. You're watching World Insight, coming to you live from Beijing. China's leading telecommunications equipment and network solutions provider ZTE has been accused of violating U.S. sanctions on Iran. The U.S. Commerce Department has announced export restrictions on ZTE. China firmly opposes the ban and urges the U.S. to change its position. Let's have a look.
A trade dispute. On Monday, the U.S. Commerce Department announced export restrictions on ZTE and 3 affiliated entities for alleged violations of U.S. export controls on Iran. In the public notice, the department listed ZTE Corporation, ZTE Kangshun, Beijing 8 Star, and ZTE Parsian. The ban will make it extremely difficult for the companies to acquire U.S. products. ZTE Corp suppliers ranging from Intel to Microsoft must apply for a specific license before shipping any American-made equipment or parts to ZTE, and generally this kind of application will be denied. Although the Chinese government has not commented on whether ZTE is guilty of the accusations, it did express strong dissatisfaction and firm objection to the punishment. China's Ministry of Commerce issued a statement on Tuesday warning that the ban could have a severe impact on bilateral business. China's foreign minister called for the two sides to cooperate.
This
is not wise in handling economic and trade disputes. Doing this will only make both sides incur losses. What we should do is to face up and negotiate a proper method to solve the problem.
The accusation towards ZTE dates back to 2012. Since that time, U.S. investigators have probed this telecom firm and its U.S. subsidiary for allegedly selling banned U.S. surveillance equipment to Iran. ZTE shut down most of its business in Iran soon after that. Iran sanctions were lifted last year. ZTE currently holds about 7% of the U.S. smartphone market, making it the fourth largest manufacturer in the country after Apple, Samsung, and LG. It has 14 offices and 6 research centers there, with 80% of its 350 staff being Americans. And it is also a sponsor of 5 NBA teams. Due to the export restrictions, ZTE has suspended its stocks trading in Hong Kong and Shenzhen since Monday. The extent of how severely the restrictions will impact ZTE's global business is unknown.
To talk about the fate of ZTE in the U.S. market, I'm joined here in the Beijing studio, Professor Liu Baocheng, Director of the Center for International Business Ethics with the University of International Business and Economics based in Beijing. Welcome, Professor. Joining us also Mr. Robert Kapp, Director of Economist Corporate Network. Welcome as well, Mr.
Thank
Kapp.
you.
First of all, the only question to be asked, and the biggest question is it fair that ZTE has been, quote-unquote, punished by the Department of Commerce in the U.S.? Professor Liu.
Well,
not give me a 30 minutes answer, but rather maybe 30 seconds. Let's just begin with that.
Actually, if you are, because I'm in the law circle, and legally speaking, they have all the logic link, and they have all the facts and the causal relationship. So I think there is no denial about the real case. So technically, they are doing in the right procedure. But of course, fairness is really depends on from which perspective. Number
what
one.
About your perspective?
Yeah, I think now, ZTE is providing more of the telecom equipments and mobile devices to Iran. So ethically, I think Iran people need more access to this type of equipment to have better access to information so that they can be more informed. And this is actually the intention of the U.S. sanction over Iran, that, they need to protect the interest of the people, either for the nuclear issue or for ballistic missile issue. So they are there to protect the interest of the issue. So now it seems that the actual fact is that they are working against the U.S. Intention of imposing such a sanction.
Right. That is interesting, isn't it? Because it's a U.S. imposed sanction. It's not a UN Security Council imposed sanction. And therefore, companies from all over the world have to obey the sanctions of one country. That is an interesting question. Maybe we could talk a little bit more in that direction. It could be any country. If one country in the Middle East have sanctions toward another country in the Middle East, therefore all the other countries from around the world, we know in the Middle East that there's a lot of conflicts, cannot do business with one or the other of the countries that we have just mentioned. That is going to be interesting. Mr. Kapp.
Well, indeed, and I think the latter scenario you described really applies to Israel and some of its neighbors. They have these unilateral, or say Arab world against Israel type of sanctions going on, which are hard for the rest of the world to follow. And those tend to be left to local issues and allow those belligerents or those people who disagree to settle that. However, what you're mentioning here regarding UN, well, actually the Iran sanctions, those weren't just from the U.S., they were in fact also from the UN. As Bao Cheng just mentioned, there was a lifting of some of these sanctions, which also the U.S. supported, regarding communications equipment for people. The key issue here was government applications.
How would you define people?
Right. Well, yes, you could say that too. But in the U.S. definition, it was, are you selling, and this is the other component that's important to bear in mind, you cannot take U.S.-made equipment and be providing it not just to Iran, by the way, also Sudan, North Korea, other countries on this blacklist. And the idea was, look, if you're going to buy our U.S.-made equipment, you cannot sell to these countries. So it wasn't so much a unilateral, you can't do business with them at all, but you can't use our products to do business with these countries.
That's interesting because we are in a globalized world.
Indeed.
One specific product is made of hundreds, if not thousands, of components. If we have countries, as you just mentioned, specifically demanding that, every product could become controversial when it comes to international trade if there's any conflict between two countries. So once again, I want to throw back to you. First of all, you talk about what is the definition of the interest of the people in Iran. And secondly, what about the point Robert mentioned, and I just reacted also, from Professor, your perspective, how does that work? And will this be used, this occasion, used as a trade barrier against certain companies who are on the rise, let's just say, in the U.S. market?
Well, it is already a technical barrier because the supply has been blocked, and it seems that the permission to export is really having a very limited chance. So therefore, taking ZTE, for example, ZTE actually on quarterly basis, they pay nearly 500 million to those, major, identified 7 major suppliers, from chips to service to...
In the U.S.
Yeah, in the U.S.
suppliers, yeah.
So the U.S. suppliers. So the, U.S. suppliers, I think they are not very happy with this issue because they are deprived of the revenue. And plus that U.S., is having a very saturated market. They see that China is a rising market, and also they see that Chinese companies working as a partner, they can spread to the world, including Iran. One day when the ban is lifted, so that's a nascent market. So I think China is really a carrier of the U.S. technology and help the U.S. to earn more money at home, which is badly needed for its competitive industry like semiconductor.
But the question is, the Department of Commerce still did what it did, despite of all of these reasoning you seem to provide. So what's going to be next? Because we've seen the fate of Huawei in the United States. One of the most well-respected Chinese telecom manufacturer and also network producer in the rest of the world, only not in the United States. It's banned totally. Are other Chinese companies, particularly high-tech related, also going to eventually, quote-unquote, endure that kinds of experience and fate?
Well, if I could also preface some of your remarks before making mine, I mean, in reference to your remarks, by saying, just as Huawei hasn't really been given access to the U.S., so has Google and Facebook and a lot of American tech leaders not being given real access to China, while they're everywhere else in the world. So that we have this situation that applies to both countries' leading tech firms, and it's very unfortunate, to be honest, because I think all these companies provide really good products and services, and the people of China as well as the people of the United States aren't able to benefit from that. Now, whether or not these bans are justified or not, that's another question, but it's getting difficult as we do this increasingly.
You could argue from both sides that if you do this and I'll do that, but nobody's looking at it as a direct reaction of any Chinese action or American action. The question is, what about this case We could
Yeah.
bring all the cases together and say, well, you guys also do this. But what about this specific case? Let's just talk about that,
Right.
make that clear. So what about this specific case? What
Well,
would that mean for all the tech giants coming from China?
But this is where I think
Not counter-related, by the way.
Right.
They are more equipment builders and telecom
Okay.
equipment builders.
But I think it fits into this bigger pattern. And to answer your point
Yeah.
specifically, the danger here is that the Chinese side views this as a kind of attack against Chinese
And it's not?
interests. Well, according to the U.S. law and according to the application of the law, and indeed, as Bao Cheng just mentioned, it's also American suppliers who suffer. So you can't really say this is all anti-Chinese in some way. It's also hurting the American interest. It's that this law was violated, and now there are going to be consequences. It then becomes a matter of how will China interpret that? Will China say, okay, you do that, I'll do something else, and then we got an escalating trade war going on? That's the real danger here.
The thing is also, when one takes action toward, let's just say, an influential giant company toward the others, one probably needs to have in mind what might be interpretation coming from the other side.
Right.
It works both ways. Professor Liu, help us to understand about that part. What would that mean for Chinese tech companies? Would that mean, one after another, they would leave the U.S.? And what would that mean for technological cooperation and national security cooperation, which has been
Good point.
one of the shining points that the two countries seem to cooperate on since the last
Trying
the
to.
two presidents were meeting with one another. So what would all of this mean?
Well, apparently, for this case, both sides get hurt, from the U.S. suppliers and to the Chinese buyer like ZTE. But the fact that the U.S. still, on the other hand, because they are the sole suppliers, so China does not, so far at least, does not have much alternative. And I think that's also may send a positive signal to China to strengthen a national consensus.
There's a
for,
silver lining reader.
A consensus to strengthen China's technological independence, which is really very well needed.
But Professor, it's well said what you said. But the thing is, we are in a globalized world.
Right,
Exactly.
that's true.
We can't deny that. We can't say my country made this and you guys can't use that.
Right.
And it's my say as to who's going to use that, because the other party also use products from all over the world, even though some could be high tech, some could be lower end product, but it's also important for people in that country as well.
I think
Whether
it
it's toilet
boils down-
papers or computer chips.
Well,
Yeah,
go ahead.
Sorry, I think it boils very simply boils down to a sort of inadequate the confidence that there is high level of suspension, and also there is AO transparency in this issue. I think from the Chinese side, both at the corporate level and also at the development level, there is also room to improve in terms of communication and the negotiation.
This is nothing new, by the way, Mr. Cap.
Right.
Trade wars and using trade as a political tool against one another in certain circumstances, despite the fact that Iran-U.S. relations has been changing very dramatically, and Iran itself has been changing very dramatically over the past few years. But what would this really mean? Where would this lead us to? Is this going to be the beginning of another round of harsh words, actions, reaction toward one another? Trade is considered to be the foundation for the U.S.-China relations, the most crucial bilateral relations. I throw in a lot of preconditions to you, but these are very important points to make before we reach any conclusion, Mr. Cap.
Well, I think you articulated that well, and indeed, this is what I'm fearful of, that this could lead to worse consequences beyond this one instance of the repercussions towards ZTE. I like to think the silver lining here could be, though, that it will encourage more opening up and more collaboration, but that's going to take some proactive efforts from both sides.
Well, that's pretty strong silver lining.
Well, let's hope that's what happens, because the
identified.
downside is really down.
It is at this moment.
Yeah, at the moment, I really choose to isolate this.
Professor Liu, we hope to isolate this, but China-U.S., we have quite a number of issues to work on, whether geopolitics or other issues related to that. But the thing is, strategic distrust is the most important negative element.
That's the root
for
of the problem.
Everything going on between these two countries, and people have
Yeah.
been working very hard to build things to the other direction, which is to build more trust. So how can both sides, in a way, this case included, this is not a single case, this case included, make sure what they do is going to be conducive to the really big picture. Of course, rule of law is important, but also at the same time, make sure the rule of law is updated.
Yeah.
It's not going to be old-timed and old-fashioned, Professor Liu.
Well, you know, by logic, you have to really check whether philosophically there is a foundation to go forward with the trade sanction, and also to alleviate the how to alleviate the trade sanction depending on the performance, and then better communication.
Well, better communication is always important, isn't
Yeah.
it? And we are doing it right now.
Hopefully
Robert Cat,
so.
Liu Baocheng, thank you so much, gentlemen, for
Thank
being
you.
with us. And that is all the time we have for today. If you'd like to see more of our program, visit our website. Just type in World Insights CCTV News into your search engine. You'll be able to find us. Or you can also check out our YouTube channel. From me, Tian Wei, and everyone at the World Insight team, thanks for watching, and tune in again tomorrow for more insights from across China and around the world. Good night.